Hello everyone, it's Chris O'Brien from Quilters Guild of South Australia. I'm here this afternoon, well it's this afternoon where we are, interviewing Bronnie Young. Bronnie Young was one of the founding members of the Guild way back in the early 80s, and she has over the decades had a significant impact on many of us as quilters. She has taught many of us hand quilting. She's certainly been influential in being a member of the executive committee. And she is just the loveliest person. So we're here today to find out a little bit more about Bronnie Young. Bronnie, one of the reasons I really wanted to interview you is because I think it's important, not implying that we're getting old, but
it's happening.
It's happening. And I think that it would be just lovely to have some kind of record, live chat record of the early years of the Guild. And I think you are one of the best people who can talk about those early years of establishing the Guild. Can you remember those days? Were they challenging? Did it happen easily? What's your memories?
As you mentioned, Chris, I started quilting when the quilt basket and the Yankalilla quilt circle started in the very early 80s, when a girl came back from Colorado who'd been on a teaching exchange and taught us, Vicky Stokes taught us how to quilt, and we had a friendship group. We were quite passionate then about the idea of being quilters, but we lived in Yankalilla and we were quite remote really from the suggestion that there'd be a Quilters Guild in South Australia. 3 of us got in a car, drove for an hour and a half to Adelaide to the Arts Council of South Australia on South Terrace. There weren't enough chairs in the room. I sat on the floor, I know that. 1 hour later, they decided to make a guild. Rachel Detman and Lane Gardner were to be our co-presidents. I knew Lane from another life. My sister lived across the road in Elizabeth from Lane. And I thought, oh, that sounds like we're in good hands. Isn't this exciting? And it was, because it was so new to all of us. We did that for about once a month for about, I'd say 6 months. And I'm only guessing here. But it was obvious we were outgrowing the Arts Council, that was for sure. But we were on the right track, and we were ready to go to Gartrell, which was where we started our meetings. Again, an hour and a half there, more than an hour at the meetings once we got to Gartrell.
And it was a cold old building,
It
wasn't it, in winter?
It was. But it was exciting. The challenges, I'm sure, were there, Chris. Until I became an exec member, I didn't realise how many challenges there were in running a women's quilting group, but that's another story. But I didn't foresee any challenges more than just getting to those meetings and just following something that I knew was good for me. And so that was how it started for me, yes. Then, as I say, it became bigger, and of course, the people like Lesser and so on. There were some wonderful people that started it, and let's say it was a very good foundation for making a guild that fulfilled all my dreams.
I think it's fulfilled a lot of our dreams. You know, we every now and then refer to it being our tribe, but it really is a bit like that, isn't it? We have a common interest, common everything, and great friendships made. You may not see them anywhere else, but you know that in a quilting community, there's really strong friendships there.
Oh, and they have endured for 30 plus years for me, that's for sure.
Yes. Now, your quilting journey took a little bit of a sideways twist when you and Jeff went over to Canada for an exchange, and we've done another video today talking about your hand quilting. But it wasn't just hand quilting that influenced you over there. It was being within the Mennonite or near the Mennonite community, wasn't it?
Yes, of course. And I don't know whether it's my German background, but of course a Prussian family that came here in the 1840s and 50s, which was my family, had been persecuted. And that's what Mennonites were. And whether that was my connection to them, I'm not sure. But I just found myself so impressed by their beautiful manner, their beautiful, generous spirit, and their quilting. And so to go into Mennonite country was just a joy. And of course it was an exchange that I became extremely able. Well, I wasn't teaching. I was the one that was the house person, and the boys were going off to school. So I went off to quilting meetings, and I went to different groups. I belonged to the Niagara Heritage Quilters, and I belonged to the Windmill Point Quilters on Mondays for all of the winter, and learned how to quilt at the frame. And I learned just how important it was to sit together and listen to each other.
Absolutely.
And around that particular quilting frame in Windmill Point, the most important person for me, I found, was Phyllis. Phyllis Fletcher was the minister's wife. She often fell asleep in the afternoons. She was over 70, and she had horses, and she would go and muck out the stables before she came to quilting. By mid-afternoon she was falling asleep at the quilt, but she had done all the listening she needed to do. And she would go home to Cecil afterwards. His name was Cecil, I thought, but she called him Cecil. And Cecil would find out whose husband wasn't well, who was depressed, who had lost his licence, or who couldn't drive anymore. And many of those women around the quilt were being brought in. They were called the shut-ins of Ridgeway, and the women of the group would go and collect them, bring them in. And it was really interesting, Chris, because that particular January 1986, December, there had been 10 feet of snow. Now don't imagine there's 10 feet of snow on the ground. That has settled down, but it's still at least 18 inches deep. And if the wind blows, it becomes almost like a snowstorm anyway, and it has to be snow. You have to get your snow shovel out and make sure the driveway is clear. That was my job. And so these women didn't drive, so somebody went and got them from the farms around. And so we would bring our paper bag lunches, and we would share the stories of the week. I had some interesting stories because I talked funny. I came from Yankalilla, and that was more than they just about fell about laughing listening to me say that. But it was all about a community and a church community. I'd come from a Uniting Church background in Yankalilla, so I was accepted, just as one of their family too. So it was lovely. Yeah. So that was.
And did that community have the auctions that Mennonites are well known for?
But they took me, or they encouraged me to go with a group of women on a bus from Ridgeway up into New Hamburg to a quilt auction, a Mennonite relief sale auction, held in an ice arena. And in the summer, of course, this is when the snow has all melted and there's no ice in the ice arena. But it's a huge stadium with bleachers, rows and rows and rows of seats. And on the floor in the middle was a big platform on which was a frame to hold a bed, and the bed would swivel with the quilt that was to be auctioned. And racks and racks. There were 700 items a day to be auctioned, 3 auctioneers at a time, 9 auctioneers for the day, who all were very, very keen to be chosen to be the auctioneers.
Now, was the auction for a particular fundraising event, or
all it was Mennonite relief? It didn't matter. It was never just for Mennonites. It was for if a Mennonite, non-Mennonite person, neighbour, had his barn burned down, they would use that money. If there was a tornado, which there often were, they would use that money to go in with their chainsaws and cut the trees down and help the families. And it was, or it could be just to make more money for particular projects. The Mennonite group in Ontario supported the Niagara Christian College, which was a Mennonite private school. And I met the 3 Cider sisters in Stevensville. Now, Stevensville was out of Ridgeway, but it was a Mennonite community, a farming community. The 3 Cider sisters made 7 or 8 quilts a year to auction at that school. I went to the auction, and they used to raise at least $2,000 a quilt, if not more.
And this
at
is
that auction
35 years ago, isn't it?
So it was huge.
Yes.
So yes, those women raised money when they quilted for the Turning Point Home for Girls, which was their project, but not for auction, no. But yes, I went to 2 auctions, one in 1986 and again in 1992 when I went back. And Larry Sider, who was the guy in charge of the 27th auction, invited me down under the ice arena to show me the mounted policeman who was guarding the loot, and there was $1 million taken that day.
Hard to believe,
It was huge. And as you sat around this auction happening, the women in their Mennonite clothes and their little white prayer bonnets would sit there watching their quilt come up. And I sat behind one particular lady one day when her beautiful blue whole cloth quilt was sold for about $2,500. She was so excited. She wasn't getting the $2,500.
Was there a little bit of competition between the women?
I think there probably was. They were all sort of nudging each other, and they weren't loud about it, but I was right behind this particular lady, and her excitement was just amazing. And I thought how blessed I was to be right behind her when her quilt was sold that morning. But there was anything from little comforters and 15-year-old girls with their first baby quilts, and sometimes it was a bit of crocheting or knitting as well, but there were 700 pieces sold in the day.
That's amazing, isn't it?
And during that auction, up in the bleachers were women. They were selling tarts with they'd grown the strawberry tarts, and they auctioned the last strawberry tart that went for hundreds of dollars. But they'd be up there hulling the strawberries. It was just an amazing. And then downstairs, from the buggies outside, there were other people selling stuff for the Mennonite relief from the backs of their buggies. So it really was. And they were selling lamb. I've never seen them lamb at that stage. I've never seen lamb sausages. They were selling fruit, bottled fruit, jams, things that they could make from their farms. It was just an amazing place.
It's obviously had a big impact on you. So quilting aside, has that year being a part of those varying communities had an impact on you personally, do you think?
I'm sure it has. And the friendships that I made when I went back 6 years later, and even up until more recently, a couple of them I know of have died. But going back after 6 years, it was like I'd never left. It was, and they were, because I think that bond you form around a hand quilting frame, you cannot, it taught me something about listening. It taught me about care. I already cared, but about a special way of caring. And I think most of our quilting communities now are very generous. We can only look at our own guild now. Everyone that I know in the Quilters Guild of South Australia is making something for somebody else. They say, well, look, I've got enough quilts. I just want to do this for somebody else now. I will make my exhibition quilt, but I'm going to keep on making the stuff for different charities. And that's what I've learned, Chris, and certainly, and when you've got a group of women around you, my Yankalilla group, they've been an amazingly supportive group as far as putting on auctions was one thing, but also supporting me at Quilting Bees. But also when times weren't all that easy for me, they became my soulmates really, and still are. So yes, that's what I learned, Chris. I knew I could trust my quilting mates, and I'm sure they knew that I could trust them and they could trust me. So it was a great learning curve. Yeah, good question.
I think that what you've just said resonates with a lot of us though, because I don't know how many quilting groups I've been at where an issue will come up and we sort of have the capacity to solve the world's problems, don't we? But it's done in such a supportive and caring way. And look, I know this is a little bit sexist, but I've always felt a little sorry that our partners, our male partners, don't have that same opportunity. No, because we deal with health issues, family issues, you name it, and we have that comfort to be able to share those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of reminds me, Chris, when I was very long time ago, I was teaching whole cloth and marking and quilting whole cloth quilts. I went into a country town, I won't mention the town, and stayed overnight with a lovely family and taught about 20 or 30 women to mark plain whole cloth quilts and how to stretch them and how to quilt them. And they said to me, we don't know how we can keep our numbers. We just can't. They keep going and coming and going and I said, well, what do you do? She said, oh, we just come and sit and sew. We just come and do our own thing. And I said to her, I've got one little suggestion to make. I said, you start doing something together, start doing something for somebody else maybe, but don't just do your own thing. They can do that at home.
Absolutely.
There's no point.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that group, they had a huge venue, they had a wonderful basis to make a great quilting group, but it was falling apart. It thrived after that.
They turned it around.
They turned it around because they were doing something for somebody else and not just themselves. And it just seemed, you know, there are still women who have small groups in their homes and they tell me, oh, we just do our own thing and we just, but I said, you know, why don't you join a group? Oh, no, we're just fine. And I think you're missing out on something.
It
You
could
really
be better.
are.
It
You could be better than that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Bronnie, it's been lovely chatting today. Thank you so much for sharing some of your early history, but it's also tied up with the Guild's early history too. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I suspect we're going to make a third video yet, because we're going to have a look at some of the work that you did when you were with the Mennonites. You okay if we move on to that one after this?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure, Chris, my pleasure.